When I was in my 20s, I held a series of jobs that were supposed to be my calling. I knew that I wanted to make a difference in the world and to live my values with a purpose. And all of the jobs that I held had promise for those intentions. They were all for change-making organizations where my work would be part of their mission, doing good in the world. And I rode in to each one of those positions with high hopes and then found myself disillusioned and burnt out within a couple of years. I struggled. I kept thinking that I was entering into my dream job, into my calling. And then after a couple of years, I questioned myself. Where was I going wrong? What was going on? Some research on burnout shows higher tendencies towards it in people who are more idealistic and more committed. This is particularly true for folks who work in nonprofits, who bring a deep commitment to their work. The earliest research on burnout showed burnout as a function of the individual. It showed that people who are very driven tend to overcommit and then overwork, burning the candle at both ends and eventually burning out. In this scenario, the desire to do good in the world burns so fiercely in an individual that they sacrifice themselves to it, working their own well-being into the ground. In their book, Proverbs of Ashes, theologians Rebecca Ann Parker and Rita Nakashima Barak argue that self-sacrifice does not save us. Rather, it harms us. They document gendered tendencies towards self-sacrifice, as women in particular are socialized to be helpful and pleasing and to put others before themselves. In patriarchal society, the archetypal good woman puts her spouse, her children, her family before herself. A really good woman also finds time and energy to put the larger community before herself and serve others in some way. It's not only women who have been socialized to self-sacrifice. Children who had absent or potentially addicted parents also learned to overfunction in their earliest relationships with their caregivers, and those children often repeat that pattern later in life. Additionally, in white supremacist society, Black and brown people are trained to self-sacrifice their needs for the needs of white folks. Anyone who has received this kind of socialization, whether it's from an inverted parent-child relationship or from patriarchy or from white supremacy, has to work daily to overcome the instinct to self-sacrifice. We often pay attention to how selfishness and domination cause harm, but self-annihilation can also cause harm. Harm to the self is harm to the fabric of being. Erasure of the self erases the beauty that the self, the beauty that you bring to the world. Loss of the self is loss of a beautiful, beloved, unique individual in the universe of being. When we say, as Unitarian Universalists, that we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, that includes the self as well as the other. Neither love, nor God, nor the human community wants or is made better by self-annihilation. every single individual has particular and stunning gifts to offer the human community, to offer the world. And that includes you. You are like no other human being on this earth. And what you have to offer is of value. No one else can bring it but you. And if you burn yourself out, burning the candle at both ends, over functioning, giving and giving to all the commitments, you won't be able to offer those incredibly beautiful and particular gifts to the things that matter most to you. Ironically, putting the self behind the other and sacrificing to people please ultimately not only harms the self, but it also harms the other and relationship. I learned this from a dear friend who would get very upset if she couldn't please me. As a child, she had learned that her worth was derivative rather than inherent, and that her only value came from doing things for other people. Although this friend was extremely helpful, ultimately, that helpfulness prevented authentic connection between us because her worth depended on my approval. So I felt obligated to praise her and to feel a certain way about her choices. It wasn't okay for me to have honest or genuine reactions because anything other than an overwhelmingly positive reaction would be devastating. Not needing to please another person because we know our internal, inherent self-worth actually serves the other person more than trying to please them, because it frees that other person to just be themselves and be true to their own wholeness and complexity. Knowing one's own worth and living it allows for true connection. It gives us the space to be ourselves in all our own wholeness and complexity without needing to do or perform in order to prove our worth in the world. Discernment about commitments requires this first step, knowing your own worth. Making commitments out of overfunctioning or people-pleasing or trying to earn your worth will likely lead to burnout and exhaustion. Dear ones, you are valuable exactly as you are. You don't need to earn your value. You don't need to sacrifice yourself on the altar of goodness or success or perfection. If you knew deep in your soul, if you knew that you already deserve love, if you knew that you're already inherently worthy and you don't need to do anything to deserve your own worth, then what would you choose to do with your time and your energy? In Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak, Palmer writes, trying to live someone else's life or to live by an abstract norm will invariably fail and might even do great damage. He says, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. I must listen for the truths and values at the heart of my own identity. Without the shoulds, without the musts, without the world rushing in to tell you, what do you know is at the heart of your identity? What's your unique purpose or purposes, and what special gifts do you have to offer this world that needs you and them so very much? I do want to name that there's more to burnout than just individual choices. Systems and institutions can sometimes ask more of us than we can give. Capitalism is a system that's designed to maximize profit from all inputs, and that includes labor. Labor is one of the inputs that goes to create things and to create profits. So that means that the system itself is designed to extract as much labor from you as possible in order to produce a profit. Even nonprofits are affected by this reality. They are situated within the larger system. Indeed, while nonprofits can push against the system of for-profit labor extraction, they still sit in the larger context of it. And studies have shown that nonprofits usually end up in a negative financial feedback loop that's called the nonprofit starvation cycle. In this nonprofit starvation cycle, nonprofits do all they can do to not spend money on overhead, including things like salaries and benefits, as well as basic infrastructure like computers and furniture, training programs. And by doing that, those nonprofits create increasingly unrealistic expectations about how much can be done with very little money, and create a feedback loop that reduces the money coming in. Many individuals who are highly committed to an ideal work in institutions who are committed to an ideal, they work in institutions that are also highly committed to an ideal. And together, those individuals and those institutions connect and interlock in high levels of commitment that make the mission more important than everything else, including the well-being of the people who work at it. Things like functioning computers, health benefits, and balanced lives. The irony here, of course, is that just like self-sacrifice at the individual level, organizational sacrifices like these, in the long run, do more harm than good. They set up that nonprofit starvation cycle, and in the long run, they undermine the effectiveness and the longevity of the institution and its staff, which makes the institution less effective in serving its mission. Lastly, I want to name that one of the things that can make us hesitant to make the true, real, full yes commitments, that can make us feel scattered and exhausted and experiencing burnout, are major life situations, like, say, a pandemic, that can wear down our reserves and make us more prone to burnout, make us less able to say yes to the things that we really want to say yes to. Right now, overlapping and interconnected systems in our lives, systems like family and work and school, have all received increased doses of stress from the pandemic. Resources to keep us going are zapped in all directions. This past week, the journalist Ellen Cushing published an article in The Atlantic entitled, "Late Stage Pandemic is Messing with Your Brain." In the article, she interviews Mike Yassa, who's a neuroscientist at the University of California, Irvine, who says, quote, "We are all walking around right now with some mild cognitive impairment. Based on everything we know about the brain, two of the things that are really good for it are physical activity and novelty. And the thing that's very bad for it is chronic and perpetual stress." Tina Franklin, a neuroscientist at Georgia Tech who Cushing interviewed, said that the pandemic is, quote, "exposing people to microdoses of unpredictable stress all the time." She actually said that prolonged boredom is hugely stressful for our brains. Our brains actually hate boredom because, quote, "environmental enrichment, being outside your home, bumping into people, commuting, all of these changes that we're collectively being deprived of right now are very associated with synaptic plasticity. They're very associated with our brains functioning, learning, and being plastic. Who knew that we would miss commuting? For the last month, I've been telling people my brain doesn't currently work the way that I'm used to it working. It doesn't retain information, it doesn't solve complex problems, and it doesn't remember anything that's not written down. I have had extraordinary privilege through this pandemic. I've been working, even preaching, as you can see, from home. I have healthcare. I've got a relatively strong immune system. I have other people in my household, and I have a warm, comfortable home with internet and television and phones and books. I'm very privileged. And I am also exhausted, depleted. My brain is functioning differently. According to Cushing's article, this is normal for this moment in our history. The Census Bureau actually shows that, quote, "the number of Americans reporting symptoms of anxiety, depression, or both quadrupled from June 2019 to December 2020. Quadrupled. This past week, we passed the 1-year anniversary of this pandemic. This Sunday, today, is our congregation's year anniversary of going virtual. I remember filming our first Sunday in an empty sanctuary last year as a surreal experience. One more layer of new understanding floating on a viscous strangeness. That floating sensation lasted for a while, but it's shifted now into a new daily reality. We've adjusted collectively and individually. But on this year anniversary, no doubt things are coming up for you as they have been for me and many folks around us. Memories, grief, pandemic fatigue and frustration, questioning. What does this mean now? Where are we going? I urge you to hold yourselves and your loved ones gently on this anniversary as your bodies, at the very least, remember the shock to the system, even if your mind isn't rehashing the 1 year ago on this day, 1 year ago on this day reel. Trying to measure a year of shock and fatigue and grief, a year of dramatic change as well as collective trauma, a year of love and human connection, a year of making it work. All of that is labor. It's emotional labor, mental labor, and spiritual labor. It takes energy and time. Try to give yourself some time and space to process, whether that's sitting down to meditate or talking it through with your family, or just a quiet walk, listening to a little music, coming to church on Sunday. Give yourself a little bit of time to process. Dramatic, global, local, and personal change has a way of shaking up our understood priorities. Over the last year, we've all learned new ways of living and of being. More has changed than you thought could change. More has changed than the powers that be thought could change. In all of this change, what have you found truly matters most to you? What are the most important things, people, priorities in your life? What is at the core of you there holding you together? Is it different than what you thought it was? And finally, as you discern your commitments in life, are the actions you take, the commitments you make each day in line with that core of you? Are you being true to yourself, to the calling of your life? I opened this sermon with a challenge to self-sacrifice. But alignment with one's values does not have to mean either self-sacrifice or ceasing to work for the common good. Rather, it means finding and keeping your balance. It means discernment, knowing your core and committing to those priorities. It means saying no to the things that are not your priorities in order to give you space to say yes to the things that are. Letting go of needless shoulds frees up your energy to be alive and enthusiastic in your yes, in that place where your values align with your joy, where your unique gifts enable and release goodness in the world. The theologian Frederick Buechner calls this the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. It's where your creativity meets the world's need, where your unique spirit dances with the world's longing for it. In her book, Practicing Theology, theologian Serene Jones tells the story of a United Church of Christ congregation that went through a visioning exercise together. Similar to our First Church Ends discernment process, the congregation got together and worked hard. They had 3 months of listening to church members' hopes and dreams, followed by 3 months of discerning and articulating the vision in those hopes and dreams, and looking at how it met the current reality of the world. They followed that with developing some concrete strategies for what the church could do to live into that vision of its members. During the listening and the visioning exercises, the congregation and the planning committee were energized and excited. But when they got into the process of planning their implementation strategy, energy took a nosedive. Jones writes, people's faces looked increasingly strained. Attendance began to drop and ideas flowed less freely. At the end of a painfully unproductive meeting, the convener asked a senior member of the committee what she thought about the emerging plans. That senior member said, "I'm sorry, but when I look at this list of things to do, I feel so tired." The committee was understandably discouraged. Working with the convener, they actually paused there and they stopped the powering through process of planning to reflect theologically on their purpose, on their why, and what their role was in this vision the congregation had created. A strange thing happened when they returned to the question of purpose and of their contribution to that purpose. Their own smallness allowed them to feel less overwhelmed. Wait, what? No, I'm serious. Through a theological understanding of their own smallness in the face of the arc of the universe, they felt less pressure to do it all, to get it right, to be perfect, to check everything off the list. Through theological reflection, they came to a universalist theological freedom. We are all inherently loved and beloved. And in the end, we will be reunited with one another and the holy in the oneness of all existence. Therefore, our work in the world is simply to be one small measure of love, that small measure that we specifically are called to be, to do only what is possible and ours to do, and to live out the love of the universe in our lives. But no more than that. We're not responsible for the whole of the universe, or for reuniting all of existence for love, or for doing every single thing that must be done. We are only called to do and be our small and specific piece of love here and now. Jones writes, when we began to truly grasp the depth of God's love for the world and the freedom that is given to us in that love, We felt not only the burden of our list lifted from our shoulders, we simultaneously began to see our list as a joyous response to the love that so freed us. A member of the committee said it this way: when we begin to see that what we do as a church doesn't matter, ultimately, we are freed to see how very much our practices do matter in the here and now. Dear ones, may you and may we together know that we are already beloved and inherently worthy, that we matter as beings and need not earn our place in the oneness of all being. May we know that we are already here and be freed to live in our specific peace of living love out loud in the world, the place where our unique gifts and beauty and joy meet the world's need for them. As Lynn Ungar said in our opening words this morning, the solutions, if there are any to be had, are complex, detailed, demanding. The answers are immediate and small. Wake up, give thanks, sing. May it be so, and amen.